My name is Jessica Taylor, and at 32, I had built my career at Pinnacle Innovations without ever using my father's name. Until last month, when the new CFO, Douglas Peters, called me into his office. "Numbers are just a story, darling," he sneered, firing me as dead weight. What he did not know was that the company's capital account was funded entirely by my father's original $42 million investment with a special clause. After being escorted out, I made one phone call. Before you continue watching, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Trust me, you will want to see what happened when my dad walked into that CFO's office the next morning. Finance was always in my blood. I graduated with an MBA from Wharton, but I never wanted to ride on my father's coattails. That is why I used my mother's maiden name, Taylor, on my resume and throughout my professional life. Most of my colleagues at Pinnacle Innovations had no idea that William Davis, the company's founding investor, was my father. Pinnacle was not just any tech company. My father helped establish it 20 years ago when the founders had nothing but a prototype and a dream. He believed in their vision for revolutionizing supply chain management software when most investors thought it was too risky. Dad was never interested in running the company himself. He preferred to provide the capital and strategic guidance while letting the technical founders build their vision. I joined Pinnacle 5 years ago, starting as a junior financial analyst. I wanted to prove myself on my own merits, to know that any success I achieved came from my abilities, not my last name. The finance department was small but efficient when I joined, led by our previous CFO, Albert Thompson, a meticulous, ethical professional who became a mentor to me. "Financial integrity is not negotiable," Jessica Albert would say during our weekly review meetings. "Companies can recover from many things, but once you lose trust in your numbers, you lose everything." Under Albert's leadership, I learned to see beyond the spreadsheets to the stories they told about organizational health. I worked my way up to senior financial analyst, taking on increasing responsibilities for budget forecasting and capital allocation reviews. My performance reviews were consistently excellent, and I developed a reputation for catching discrepancies others missed. Stephanie Wilson from HR became one of my closest friends at the company. We often had lunch together in the courtyard, discussing everything from office politics to our weekend plans. "You know, Jessica," Stephanie mentioned during one of our lunches last year, "Albert speaks very highly of you to the executive team. I would not be surprised if you were on the short list for Director of Financial Planning when Maria retires next year." Brian Andrews, another mentor in the finance department, had taken me under his wing early on, teaching me the intricacies of our capital structure. "The foundation of this company is solid," he explained during a late-night review session. "Your father and the other early investors set up unusually strong protections. They were visionaries not just about technology, but about corporate governance." I nodded, pretending this was new information, though I had grown up hearing my father discuss these protections at the dinner table. What Brian did not know was that I had intimate knowledge of exactly how those investor agreements worked. Pinnacle had been thriving. Our software platform had become industry standard, and we were expanding into new markets. Revenue had grown 20% year over year for the past 3 years. Employee satisfaction scores were consistently high, and we had been named one of the best places to work in the tech industry 2 years running. Then Albert announced his retirement. After 30 years in finance, he wanted to spend more time with his grandchildren and traveling the world with his wife. The company conducted what they called an extensive search for his replacement, though rumors suggested the board had their eye on someone specific from the beginning. Douglas Peters arrived with considerable fanfare. His resume included impressive stints at larger tech companies and a reputation for operational efficiency. At the announcement meeting, our CEO praised his bold vision and strategic approach to financial management. Everyone applauded politely, though some of us exchanged uncertain glances. Douglas was charming with the executive team from day one, joining their happy hours and golf outings. With the finance team, however, he was noticeably cooler. He scheduled individual meetings with each of us, ostensibly to understand our roles and perspectives. When my turn came, I brought a comprehensive overview of our current projects and capital allocation strategies. I had spent the weekend preparing, eager to make a good impression. "That is very thorough, Jessica," he said, barely glancing at my materials. "But I am more interested in where we can find inefficiencies. Who on the team is underperforming? Where can we trim the fat?" His questions caught me off guard. "Everyone on our team contributes significantly," I explained. Albert built a lean operation where each role serves a specific purpose. Douglas leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk on his face. Albert had his way of doing things. I have mine. Times are changing, and we need to be more aggressive about growth. Something about his tone made me uneasy, but I reminded myself that new leaders often want to make their mark. I still had hopes for the director position, especially given Albert's endorsement before leaving. I believed my record would speak for itself, and that proved both true and false in ways I never expected. 6 weeks after Douglas took over, he called a company-wide meeting to introduce his bold new direction for Pinnacle. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as employees found their seats. I sat with Stephanie and Brian Notepad ready to capture key points. Douglas strode onto the stage with confident energy, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His presentation was slick-filled with impressive graphics and ambitious growth projections. We have been successful, he acknowledged, but we have been playing it safe. To reach the next level, we need to redefine our approach to financial management. As he clicked through slides showing revenue projections nearly double our current growth rate, I felt my professional alarm bells ringing. The numbers simply did not add up. The projections assumed market penetration rates that were historically unprecedented in our industry, without accounting for the increased costs associated with such expansion. After the presentation, employees filed out with mixed reactions. Some seemed energized by the ambitious vision, while others appeared concerned about the implications. "Did those numbers seem off to you?" I asked Brian quietly as we walked back to our department. He nodded slightly. "The projections are certainly optimistic, but perhaps he has strategies we have not considered yet." The next morning, I gathered my courage and drafted a thoughtful email to Douglas, highlighting specific areas where I thought the projections might benefit from additional analysis. I included historical data supporting my concerns and offered to help refine the models. I was careful to frame everything constructively, focusing on strengthening the plan rather than criticizing it. His response came 3 hours later. "Jessica, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but these projections have been vetted by external consultants with broader industry experience. Let us focus on implementation rather than questioning the direction. Douglas." The dismissive tone stung, but I told myself he was still settling in. Perhaps he needed time to recognize the value of internal expertise. Over the next few weeks, Douglas began bringing in his own people. First came Elizabeth Palmer, his executive assistant, who seemed to function more as a gatekeeper than an assistant. Then came 2 financial analysts from his previous company who were given desks prominently positioned near his office. During our weekly finance meeting, Douglas introduced a new reporting structure that effectively sidelined most of the existing team. To streamline decision-making, he explained, major financial reviews will go through my core team first. Brian raised his hand. "What about the institutional knowledge we bring? Some of us have been managing these accounts for years." Douglas smiled thinly. "Fresh eyes often see things experienced ones miss. Do not worry, you will all have plenty to do." Within 2 months, the first round of optimization cuts began. 10% of the workforce was let go, including several employees who had been with the company since its early days. The official explanation was role redundancy, but I noticed a pattern. Many of those let go had been vocal about maintaining the company's original culture and methodologies. When Jerry from accounting, a 20-year veteran of the company, was escorted out, I approached Douglas directly. "Jerry managed our largest client relationships," I said. "He saved us millions over the years by catching billing discrepancies. His salary is a fraction of the value he brings." Douglas looked at me with cold eyes. "Jessica, you are an analyst, not a business strategist. Jerry was resistant to our new direction. Sometimes loyalty to the past becomes a liability." That night I stayed late reviewing our financial reports, something bothering me about the recent changes. That is when I discovered Douglas had begun restructuring our capital accounts in ways that potentially violated our investor agreements. The original investment structure, including my father's founding stake, had specific clauses about how capital could be reallocated. I stared at my screen, unsure what to do. Should I tell my father? No. I had spent my entire career avoiding special treatment. I decided to handle it professionally first, through proper channels. The next day I requested a meeting with Douglas to discuss my findings. His assistant Elizabeth informed me his calendar was full for the next 2 weeks but added me to his consideration list. Instead, I documented my concerns in a detailed memo copying our legal counsel Tyler Matthews. Within an hour, Tyler requested I come to his office. "Jessica, I understand your concerns," he said carefully, "but Douglas has received board approval for his restructuring plans. Perhaps there has been a miscommunication about the specifics. The investor agreements explicitly prohibit these types of transfers without notifying the founding investors," I insisted, pulling up the relevant sections on my tablet. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "The legal landscape has evolved since these agreements were drafted. Our current interpretation gives management more flexibility." As I left his office, I realized something troubling was happening. The checks and balances that had maintained Pinnacle's financial integrity were being systematically dismantled, and few people seemed willing to challenge it. That evening, for the first time, I seriously considered calling my father. But professional pride held me back. I had built my career on standing on my own, and I was determined to address this through proper corporate channels first. I had no idea how quickly things would unravel from there. After my conversation with Tyler, I knew I needed irrefutable evidence if I was going to make any headway against Douglas's concerning financial practices. I spent evenings and weekends compiling a comprehensive analysis documenting the problems with his approach, from the unrealistic growth projections to the potentially illegal capital restructuring. The stress began taking a toll. I developed insomnia, often lying awake, rehashing conversations and strategizing my next steps. My usual morning runs became sporadic as exhaustion set in. Friends outside work noticed the change. "You look terrible," my friend Natalie said bluntly over coffee one Sunday. "This job is consuming you." "I just need to resolve this situation," I insisted, not elaborating. How could I explain that I was trying to protect a company that technically belonged partly to my family without sounding privileged? Monday morning, I requested a meeting with my direct supervisor, Michael Stevens. He had been with the finance department for 15 years and had always appreciated my attention to detail. "I have serious concerns about our current financial direction," I explained, sliding my analysis across his desk. Michael glanced at the document, but did not open it. "Jessica, I value your dedication, but I need to be straight with you. Douglas is not someone you want to challenge." "This is not about challenging him," I clarified. "These practices could expose us to significant liability." Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. "3 people who raised similar concerns have already been let go. Douglas has the board's full confidence right now. My advice: keep your head down and focus on your assigned projects." His warning was clear, but I could not just ignore what I was seeing. The next day, I discovered something even more alarming. Several founding employees who held small but significant equity stakes were being targeted for removal, with their positions being labeled as redundant. This pattern suggested Douglas was systematically removing people with connections to the company's founding era. The work environment grew increasingly hostile. Projects I had previously managed were reassigned to Douglas's new hires. My input was no longer requested at meetings where I had once been a key contributor. Email threads about important financial decisions no longer included me. I began documenting everything: emails, meeting notes, changes to financial reports. If I was going to be pushed out, I wanted evidence of why it was happening. During lunch, Stephanie pulled me aside in the cafeteria. "Be careful, Jessica," she whispered. "HR has been asked to compile performance issues for several people in finance. Your name was on the list." "Performance issues?" I was stunned. "My reviews have been exemplary for 5 years. Stephanie nodded grimly. "They are creating paper trails retroactively. The new HR director is cooperating completely." That evening, I learned Stephanie had been right to be concerned. I received a formal email citing performance concerns that had never been mentioned before, with Douglas requesting a comprehensive self-assessment of my contributions to the department. The stress began affecting my health more noticeably. I developed persistent headaches and found myself constantly on edge. My apartment became cluttered, as I lacked the energy for basic tidying after my long days documenting financial discrepancies. Despite the increasing isolation, I made one last attempt to work within the system. I submitted a formal documentation of my concerns through our ethics hotline, which was supposed to provide anonymous reporting of potential corporate malfeasance. 3 days later, I was removed from all my major projects and assigned to a special audit of office supply expenses, a task typically given to interns. The message was unmistakable. I was being sidelined. That Friday, Brian stopped by my desk as most people were leaving for the weekend. "They are setting you up, Jessica," he said quietly. "Douglas has been asking pointed questions about your work, trying to find mistakes. He seems determined to build a case against you." "Why? I am just doing my job, protecting the company's financial integrity." Brian glanced around to ensure no one was listening. "Some of us think he is clearing out anyone who might question his methods before the next board presentation. He keeps talking about a major restructuring that will unlock shareholder value." I thanked Brian for the warning, but as I drove home that evening, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I was being systematically isolated and delegitimized. My career at Pinnacle, which I had built so carefully over 5 years, was being dismantled piece by piece. For the first time, I seriously considered reaching out to my father. He was not just a major investor, he was the architect of many of the protections Douglas seemed to be violating. But making that call felt like admitting defeat, like confirming I could not succeed on my own merits. I decided to give it one more weekend to review my documentation and consider my options. I had no idea that by Monday morning the decision would be made for me in the most humiliating way possible. Monday morning, I arrived at work to find an email from Elizabeth Douglas's assistant requesting my presence at a performance review at 11 a.m. The meeting included Douglas, the new HR director, Patricia Dawson, and Tyler from legal. The combination sent my anxiety spiraling, but I was determined to face whatever was coming with professionalism. I spent the next 2 hours organizing my documentation of financial discrepancies, preparing a defense of my work, and reviewing my consistently positive performance evaluations from previous years. I printed copies of everything, suspecting my digital access might soon be restricted. At exactly 11, I knocked on the conference room door, files in hand. Douglas sat at the head of the table with Patricia and Tyler flanking him. No one smiled as I entered. "Jessica, please sit down." Douglas gestured to the chair at the opposite end of the table. The distance felt intentional, isolating. Before I could place my documentation on the table, Douglas began speaking. "We have called you here today to discuss the termination of your employment with Pinnacle Innovations, effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. Despite the warnings and signs, I had not truly believed they would go through with it. "On what grounds?" I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. Patricia slid a folder toward me. "We have documented multiple instances of insubordination, failure to adapt to new methodologies, and undermining leadership directives." I opened the folder to find a collection of distorted interpretations of my actions over the past months. My attempts to correct financial projections were labeled as resistance to strategic vision. My concerns about capital restructuring were described as failure to comprehend modern financial practices. "These accusations are completely fabricated," I said, reaching for my own documentation. "I have evidence that the concerns I raised were valid and based on solid financial analysis." Douglas waved his hand dismissively. "Your resistance to change has become a liability to this company. We need forward-thinking innovators, not deadweight clinging to outdated practices." "Deadweight," I echoed, shock, giving way to anger. "I have saved this company millions through my analysis. I have identified and corrected errors that would have had serious regulatory consequences." Douglas leaned forward, a cold smile on his face. "Numbers are just a story, darling, and I am telling a different one now. Your story no longer fits our narrative." The condescension in his voice, the dismissive darling, sent a flush of humiliation through me. Tyler and Patricia stared at their notepads, unwilling to meet my eyes. "You are making a serious mistake," I said quietly. "The financial restructuring you are implementing violates several investor agreements." Tyler finally spoke. "All our current practices have been reviewed for legal compliance, Jessica. Your concerns, while noted, are not supported by our legal assessment." Douglas stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Security will escort you to your desk to collect personal belongings. Company property, including your laptop and phone, will remain here. Your access to all systems has already been terminated." I sat frozen, unable to believe this was happening. 5 years of dedicated work dismissed in a 5-minute meeting with fabricated accusations. A security guard I had greeted every morning for years stood awkwardly at the door, now tasked with treating me like a potential threat. "Is this really necessary?" I asked Patricia as we walked to my desk. The entire floor watched in uncomfortable silence as I was escorted through the office. "Standard procedure for financial department terminations," she replied stiffly, not meeting my eyes. I emptied my desk into a cardboard box. Family photos, my spare shoes, the plant Brian had given me for my work anniversary. The personal artifacts of a career reduced to a small container. My employee badge was cut in half before my eyes. The security guard walked me to my car, standing silently as I placed the box in my trunk. As he turned to leave, he murmured, "This is not right. Everyone knows it." His small act of kindness nearly broke me, but I managed to hold myself together until I was inside my car. Then the tears came hot and furious. I pounded the steering wheel in frustration, all the stress and anxiety of the past months finally erupting. After nearly an hour of alternating between tears and anger, I tried to log into my email from my personal phone, hoping to save some of my documentation. Access denied. They had moved quickly to cut me off from all evidence. I drove home in a daze, the box of belongings on my passenger seat, a stark reminder of how quickly a career could be dismantled. At home, I collapsed on my couch emotionally and physically exhausted. As evening fell, I finally confronted the question I had been avoiding. Should I call my father? For 5 years, I had built my career without leveraging his name or position. I had wanted to succeed or fail on my own merits. But this was not about my career anymore. Douglas was potentially jeopardizing the entire company with his financial manipulations, a company my father had helped build from nothing. After hours of internal debate, I made the call. "Dad," my voice cracked slightly as he answered. "Jessica, is everything all right? You never call during work hours." My father's voice was immediately concerned. "I am not at work anymore," I said, the reality of those words still shocking. "I was fired today." "What?" The surprise in his voice was genuine. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, I detailed the events of the past months. Douglas's arrival, the concerning financial practices, my attempts to address them through proper channels, and finally, my humiliating dismissal. "The thing is, Dad," I concluded, "I do not think this is just about me. The capital restructuring he is implementing violates the protective clauses you and the other founding investors put in place. He is dismantling the financial safeguards systematically." There was a long pause before my father responded, his voice, now calm but with an undercurrent of steel I recognized from my childhood. "Jessica, do you remember when you were 16 and decided you wanted nothing to do with the family business, when you said you would make your own way?" "Of course," I replied, confused by the change in topic. "I was proud of you then, and I am proud of you now. You have built your career on your own terms. But what is happening at Pinnacle is not just about your job. It is about protecting something we built for the right reasons." He sighed deeply. "There is something you should know. When I provided the initial $42 million in funding, I included what the lawyers called a corporate governance protection clause. In simple terms, if the company ever implements financial restructuring that violates specific principles outlined in the agreement without notifying the founding investors, those investors can call the entire investment due immediately." I sat up straighter. "You mean you could?" "I could require Pinnacle to repay the original investment, adjusted for inflation and growth, within 30 days. Given the company's current cash position, that would be financially devastating." "Did Douglas know about this clause?" I asked. "If he had done proper due diligence on the founding investment structure, he would. But based on what you are describing, he either does not know or does not believe anyone would invoke it." A mix of emotions washed over me, vindication, but also concern about the wider implications. What happens to the employees if you call in the investment? "That depends on how the board responds. My goal would not be to harm the company, but to remove those causing harm. I would need your help, though. I need documentation of exactly which clauses have been violated." "I tried to preserve evidence, but they cut off my access," I explained. "Then we go to the next level. I will contact Lauren Montgomery, our family attorney. She helped draft the original agreements." The next morning, I met my father and Lauren at her downtown office. Lauren was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney in her 50s who had advised our family for decades. Based on what you have described, Jessica, there are at least 3 clear violations of the founding investor agreement, Lauren confirmed after hearing my account. The capital restructuring alone would trigger the protective clause, but the systematic removal of founding-era employees with equity stakes strengthens the case considerably. She pulled out the original investment documents, pointing to specific sections. Your father was unusually prescient in insisting on these protections. Most investors do not think this far ahead. My father nodded. I have seen too many good companies destroyed by short-term financial engineering. These protections were designed precisely for this situation. For the next several hours, we developed a strategy. Lauren would prepare the formal documentation required to present to the board. I would provide detailed testimony about the financial changes I had witnessed, and my father would invoke the protection clause if the board failed to address the issues. There is something else my father said as our meeting concluded. I think you should be present when I confront Douglas. I felt a surge of anxiety at the thought of facing the man who had humiliated me so thoroughly. I do not know if that is a good idea. Jessica, you did nothing wrong. You tried to protect the company through proper channels. Now we are simply using the legal protections that were always in place. Hiding would send the wrong message. I recognized the wisdom in his words, but the prospect still terrified me. Would appearing alongside my father undermine everything I had worked for, the professional identity I had built, separate from my family name? That evening, I reached out to Brian, asking if he could discreetly provide any documentation of the financial changes Douglas had implemented. His response surprised me. Already compiled everything. Several of us have been documenting it all. We were hoping someone would be able to stop him. When can we meet? The next day, I met Brian at a coffee shop far from the office. He handed me a flash drive. This contains copies of before and after versions of all the major financial restructuring documents. 8 of us have been tracking changes and saving evidence. You risked your job for this, I said, touched by his integrity. We all did, he replied grimly. This is not about loyalty to you, though we are all angry about how you were treated. This is about protecting a company we believe in. Armed with this additional evidence, Lauren was able to prepare an even stronger case. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Stephanie from HR sent me private messages from Patricia Dawson, explicitly discussing the creation of false performance issues for employees who questioned Douglas's methods. As the pieces fell into place, I struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of me felt vindicated that my concerns were being proven legitimate. Another part felt guilty about involving my father after years of professional independence. But the strongest feeling was determination to correct the injustice not just against me, but against the company itself. The confrontation was set for Thursday morning. My father would first meet privately with Douglas. Then we would present our case to the full board. As Wednesday night fell, I barely slept, rehearsing what I would say, how I would maintain my composure when facing the executives who had allowed my humiliating dismissal. My father sensed my anxiety when he picked me up Thursday morning. Remember, Jessica, today is not about revenge. It is about restoring proper governance to a company worth saving. I nodded, trying to embrace that perspective, as we drove toward the Pinnacle headquarters where, just 10 days earlier, I had been escorted out like a criminal. Now I was returning not as an employee, but as a defender of the company's founding principles. Whatever happened next would change everything, not just for me, but for everyone at Pinnacle. The receptionist's eyes widened as my father and I walked through the main entrance of Pinnacle Innovations. I was dressed in my most professional attire, a navy blue suit that projected confidence I did not entirely feel. Mr. Davis, she stammered, recognizing one of the company's founding investors immediately. We were not expecting you today. I am here to see Douglas Peters, my father said pleasantly, as if this were a routine visit. No need to announce me. I know the way. Before she could respond, we were already walking toward the executive floor. Employees stopped in their tracks as we passed, whispers following in our wake. I kept my expression neutral, though inside my heart was racing. Outside Douglas's office, Elizabeth looked up from her desk in shock. Mr. Davis, you cannot just... Elizabeth, is it? My father smiled warmly. I am certain Douglas can spare a few minutes for one of the founding investors. We will see ourselves in. Without waiting for a response, he opened Douglas's door. I followed, staying slightly behind him. Douglas was on a phone call, his back to the door as he gazed out his floor-to-ceiling windows. He turned at the intrusion, irritation flashing across his face before recognition set in. "I will call you back," he said hurriedly into the phone before standing. "Mr. Davis, what an unexpected pleasure. Had I known you were visiting, I would have prepared a proper welcome." My father closed the door behind us. "This is not a social call, Douglas. I believe you have already met my daughter, Jessica." Douglas froze his eyes, darting between us as the implication sank in. "Your daughter, Jessica Taylor, is Jessica Davis," Taylor, my father confirmed. "She chose to use her mother's maiden name professionally to avoid any perception of nepotism. A principle I respected until now." Douglas attempted to recover his composure. "I see. Well, this is certainly an interesting development. Perhaps we should discuss this with HR present." "That will not be necessary for our preliminary conversation," my father said, taking a seat uninvited. "Please sit. This will be easier if we are all comfortable." Douglas reluctantly returned to his chair, his confidence visibly shaken. I remained standing, unwilling to take the psychological subordinate position of sitting while he remained elevated at his desk. "I have been reviewing some concerning changes to Pinnacle's financial structure," my father began conversationally. "Specifically, the capital account restructuring you have implemented over the past few months." "All changes have been approved by the board," Douglas said quickly. "We are modernizing our financial approach to maximize shareholder value." "Interesting perspective," my father nodded. "Are you familiar with Section 7.3 of the Founding Investment Agreement? The Corporate Governance Protection Clause?" The blood drained from Douglas's face. I was assured by legal that all changes complied with existing agreements. "Then legal gave you dangerously incomplete information," my father said, his voice still pleasant, but now with an unmistakable edge. "The clause specifically prohibits the exact type of capital restructuring you have implemented without notification and approval from the founding investors, of which I am the largest." Douglas swallowed hard. "This is clearly a misunderstanding that we can resolve. If there are concerns about the direction of our financial strategy—" "The time for discussion was before you began dismantling the company's financial safeguards," my father interrupted. "Before you systematically removed employees who raised legitimate concerns. Before you fired my daughter under false pretenses for doing exactly what her job required, protecting the financial integrity of this company." "I had no idea of her connection to you," Douglas stammered. "That is precisely the point. I spoke for the first time. I never used that connection. I raised concerns through proper channels based on professional assessment. You dismissed those concerns and fabricated performance issues to justify terminating me." Douglas turned to me, desperation now evident. "Jessica, perhaps we acted hastily. If you would consider returning to your position." "That will be discussed at the board meeting," my father interjected, "which begins in 30 minutes. I have already spoken with the chairman and requested an emergency session. All board members have been notified." "What exactly are you proposing?" Douglas asked, his voice now tinged with fear. My father stood straightening his tie. "One of two things will happen today. Either the board will take immediate action to address the violations of the founding investment agreement, including leadership changes, or I will invoke the protection clause and call due the entire founding investment adjusted for 20 years of growth. The current value would be approximately $115 million due within 30 days. Douglas paled. "That would bankrupt the company." "It would," my father agreed, "which is why I trust the board will make the correct decision. We will see you in the boardroom shortly." As we turned to leave, Douglas called out desperately, "This is just about your daughter, is not it? A father protecting his little girl." I turned back, meeting his eyes directly. "No, Douglas. This is about protecting a company from the damage you have done. The fact that you cannot tell the difference speaks volumes." The boardroom was filled with tension when we arrived. The 12 board members sat around the massive table, expressions ranging from concern to outright fear. The CEO, Martin Reynolds, looked particularly uncomfortable. My father was invited to present first. He outlined the violations of the investment agreement clearly and concisely, then introduced me to provide specific examples. I stepped forward professionally, detailing the financial restructuring issues I had identified before my termination. I presented the documentation Brian and others had provided, showing clear violations of not just the investment agreement, but potentially SEC regulations as well. Douglas attempted to defend his actions, claiming the changes were necessary for aggressive growth and dismissing my concerns as resistance to change. His arguments grew increasingly desperate as board members began asking pointed questions about specific transactions. The turning point came when the chairman, Eleanor Bennett, addressed Douglas directly. "Let me be absolutely clear," she said severely. "Are you telling this board that you implemented these changes without understanding the founding investment structure and that you terminated an employee for raising legitimate concerns about potential violations?" "The termination was based on performance issues," Douglas insisted weakly. I calmly presented the messages Stephanie had provided, showing explicit instructions to create false performance documentation. The room fell silent as board members read the damning evidence. "I have seen enough," Eleanor finally said. "Douglas, please step outside while the board deliberates." For 45 minutes, my father and I waited in an adjacent conference room while the board discussed the situation. Finally, we were called back in. Douglas was noticeably absent. Eleanor addressed us formally. "The board has voted unanimously to terminate Douglas Peters' employment with Pinnacle Innovations effective immediately. We acknowledge the serious breaches of the founding investment agreement and commit to immediate corrective action." Martin Reynolds, the CEO, looked directly at me. "Jessica, on behalf of the executive team, I extend our sincere apology for how you were treated. We would like to offer you reinstatement to your position with a promotion to Director of Financial Compliance and appropriate compensation adjustment." I took a deep breath, the vindication both sweet and surreal. "I appreciate the offer, but I will need time to consider it. The culture that allowed these violations to occur needs significant change before I could consider returning." Eleanor nodded respectfully. "A fair assessment. The board has also voted to establish an independent review of all executive decisions made during Mr. Peters' tenure with a focus on restoring proper financial governance. We would welcome your input in that process, whether as an employee or consultant." As the meeting concluded, board members approached individually to express their regret over what had happened. Some had clearly been unaware of the full extent of Douglas's actions, while others admitted they had not exercised proper oversight. Walking out of the building, I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, relief, but also a strange sense of loss. The company I had devoted 5 years to would never look the same to me again. "You handled that with remarkable grace," my father said as we reached his car. "I learned from the best," I replied finally, allowing myself a small smile, though I am not sure what comes next. "That," he said, "is entirely up to you. But whatever you decide, you will face it, on your own terms, with your integrity intact." As we drove away from Pinnacle, I gazed back at the building that had been the center of my professional life. Whether I returned or not, I had stood my ground when it mattered most, and that I realized was a victory no one could take from me. The weeks following the board meeting were a period of profound reflection for me. I took time off, something I had rarely done in my career. My apartment, which had become cluttered during the stressful final months at Pinnacle, was thoroughly cleaned and reorganized. I started running again, gradually rebuilding the physical stamina that stress had eroded. Offers began coming in almost immediately. Word spreads quickly in financial circles, and the story of how a major tech company's CFO had been removed after violating founding investment agreements had become something of a legend. Recruiters called with opportunities at other tech firms, consulting companies reached out about compliance expertise roles, and several investment firms expressed interest in my analytical skills. I declined them all, at least temporarily. I needed time to process what had happened and decide what path truly aligned with my values. 2 weeks after Douglas's termination, I met Stephanie for coffee. She had resigned from Pinnacle the day after the board meeting. "I could not stay," she explained. "Not after seeing how quickly people compromise their ethics when pressured. HR should protect employees, not help fabricate reasons to fire them." "What will you do now?" I asked. "I am starting a consulting practice focused on ethical HR policies," she said, a new energy in her voice. "Companies need guidance on building cultures where raising concerns is valued, not punished." Brian had stayed at Pinnacle, accepting a promotion to head of financial analysis. "Someone needs to help rebuild properly," he told me during our weekly check-in calls. "The new interim CFO is actually listening to the team. Things are slowly improving." 1 month after the confrontation, I finally decided to meet with Eleanor and Martin to discuss their offer of reinstatement. We met at a neutral location, a private dining room at a downtown restaurant. "We have completed the independent review," Eleanor informed me. "The findings were concerning, but not catastrophic. With proper adjustments, all capital structure issues can be remediated without regulatory consequences." "And the culture issues?" I asked directly. Martin leaned forward. "We are implementing a comprehensive ethics program, including anonymous reporting with board-level oversight. No employee should ever fear retaliation for raising legitimate concerns." Their offer was generous Director of Financial Compliance, reporting directly to the board's audit committee with substantial autonomy. The role would involve rebuilding proper financial safeguards and training teams on ethical financial practices. "I appreciate the offer," I said after careful consideration, "but I have realized something important during this time away. My greatest strength was always my independence, my willingness to stand apart when necessary. I am not sure I can maintain that within the same organizational structure, no matter how improved." Eleanor nodded understanding. "What are you considering instead?" "I am starting my own financial compliance consulting firm," I explained, "helping companies build ethical financial structures from the beginning rather than fixing them in crisis." Rather than disappointment, I saw respect in their eyes. "Would Pinnacle be able to engage your services as you establish your practice?" Martin asked. "I would be open to that discussion," I agreed, as an independent consultant with clear parameters. In the months that followed my new venture, Integrity Financial Consulting began to take shape. I leased a small office, developed service offerings, and began reaching out to my network. My father offered funding, but I declined, though I did accept his advice and industry introductions. "You were right to maintain your independence," he told me over dinner one evening. "But remember that using connections is not the same as exploiting them. Relationships matter in business as long as the work itself stands on its own merits." This wisdom helped me reconcile something I had struggled with throughout my career: the balance between earned achievement and the privileges of my background. I could acknowledge the doors my family name might open, while ensuring the work I delivered was exceptional on its own terms. 6 months after leaving Pinnacle, I had built a small but growing client base. Companies facing regulatory challenges, startups wanting to establish proper financial governance from the beginning, and firms recovering from their own financial leadership crises. I hired my first 2 employees, promising them the kind of supportive, ethical environment I wished I had consistently experienced. The most unexpected development came when I established a mentorship program for young financial professionals, particularly women building careers in male-dominated financial departments. The program focused not just on technical skills, but on navigating complex ethical situations and advocating effectively for financial integrity. The hardest lesson I learned, I told my first group of mentees, was that integrity often comes with a cost, but compromising your principles ultimately costs far more. 1 year after the confrontation with Douglas, I received word that he had struggled to find comparable employment. His reputation had been damaged not by any public statement from me or Pinnacle, but by the simple facts of what had occurred. In financial leadership circles, violating founding investment agreements and retaliating against employees who raised legitimate concerns were serious red flags. I felt no satisfaction in his difficulties. What had happened was not about personal vindication, but about protecting something valuable from harm. The purpose had never been to destroy a career, but to preserve the integrity of a company worth saving. The profound lesson I carry forward is this: true success is never built on undermining others or cutting ethical corners. It comes from standing firmly for what is right, even when doing so is difficult or costly. Numbers are not just stories to be manipulated. They represent real value, real people, and real consequences. In the end, the career I built is stronger, not despite the challenges I faced, but because of how I faced them. Independence does not mean refusing all help or connection. It means maintaining the integrity to know when to stand alone and when to stand together with others who share your values. What was your experience with workplace retaliation or ethical challenges? Have you ever had to stand up against questionable practices in your professional life? Leave a comment below sharing your story. And if this tale of corporate justice resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that standing up for what is right is always worth it. Thank you for listening, and remember, your integrity is your most valuable professional asset worth protecting at all costs.